Huwaida Arraf, one of the founders of ISM, one of the founders of the Flotilla to Gaza. You're here in Beirut. We have this pleasure of having you. I would like to ask you a few questions. First off, many people don't know about your background, what got you involved in these things. Of course, a lot of Palestinians get involved because just of their Palestinian background, but what triggered you to on this path of activism?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you. It's been many, many, many years. It's great to be here in Beirut. I wish it was under better circumstances, of course. My parents left Palestine. We're not refugees. My father's village is still there in 48. My mother's from Beit Zahur, which is still there, of course, under Israeli occupation. But they left feeling that there was no future where their kids, where their children could have opportunity, could experience any kind of equality and freedom. And so they made their way to the United States. My mother was almost 9 months pregnant with me when they arrived in the US. And so I was born in the United States. We grew up, we didn't have a lot, but we had enough. And we grew up with a connection to Palestine. I went off to a pretty decent university, and in those university years went over also to Palestine and spent a year. It awakened in me not only this sense of knowledge of this great injustice that's being done to Palestinians, but also a realization that my parents sacrificed so I could have what so many Palestinians don't have. I had this American passport that meant, for the most part, I wasn't subjected to the cruel and inhumane, degrading treatment that I witnessed. And with that realization came, for me, an understanding that I had a responsibility. What do I do with the fact that I had these opportunities due to my parents' sacrifice of leaving their homeland and everything they knew behind? How do I contribute to my people's struggle? And so after graduating from college, I moved to Jerusalem, to Al-Quds. Back then it was to work for, they were talking about the era of the Oslo peace process, and there were all these programs to bring people together. And I was skeptical of these programs, but I said I wanted to know how they work on the inside. And so I joined one of these programs as a coordinator, and it brought youth together, about the ages of 13, 14, to get to be friends, to break down the stereotypes and the walls that they say that tear people apart, in the hopes of building a future generation of leaders that will foster peace, etc. That's the lingo. What I quickly came to realize is, well, it's great for people to meet. It's great to dialogue. I'll never say I'm not going to dialogue with someone, but these programs create this feeling good about yourself, because now you have a friend from the other side, mainly Israelis. Now they know Palestinians. They would become best friends. But what happened is they did nothing to tear down the structures that tear them apart, right? It was about, as we know, normalizing this situation. So we would have the kids and do these programs, and then the kids would go back home, and the Israelis would go back home to their towns and cities built on the ruins of Palestinian villages, and the Palestinians, we'd have to drive through checkpoint after checkpoint under the guns of Israeli soldiers that were probably, the sisters or brothers of their new Israeli best friends. But when we wanted to bring up programs that actually addressed, the structural issue, the Jewish supremacy that is in place, the colonialism, we were shut down. So I, for example, wanted to take, and I did take students to sit in solidarity with a Palestinian home that was being threatened from demolition. But I had to do that without the actual leadership of the organization knowing. My colleagues knew and they supported, but at a structural level, leadership level, no, we couldn't do that. And so I quickly left this organization, of course, and the Intifada, the second Intifada started, and I wanted to be more in the streets, because what was happening required people to take to the streets. No more talking. Talking wasn't enough, but the real thing is I felt these programs, and anyone claiming to care about freedom and justice has to work to dismantle the structures that tear people apart. You can't talk about a dialogue and negotiations while you accept the structural racism that is in place.
So you, along with George Rashmawi and I'm blanking out now, what's her name in the West? Nata Golani. You started the ISM. You were kind of the North American part of it. There were the people on the ground. And along with many organizers around the world, brought hundreds, if not thousands, of Westerners to the West Bank during and after the Second Intifada. Looking right now, 20 somewhat years later, how do you see the effects of that ISM at that time? Looking at these people now, grown up, different ages, how do you assess it, the ISM at that time?
Well, yes, I'm considered one of the co-founders, and certainly George Rashmawi, there was Ghassan Andoni, there was now my partner, Adam, Netta, and so many other people that frequently aren't kind of mentioned, but they gave a lot of their experience in creating the ISM, which was an idea that we needed to globalize the Intifada. Myself, I was kind of this naive, young college graduate who grew up learning about Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and imagined this great Palestinian kind of popular uprising revolution. And I didn't know myself about the history, the long history of Palestinian popular resistance. So when I was all excited about this and talking to people about it, they would look at me and say, Huwaida, we did all that. Of course, we didn't study it in US textbook or in US popular culture or around the world, but Palestinians have a long history of this kind of creative popular resistance. And so I had a lot to learn about my own history. But then also, okay, so what do? We have this situation where people feel so disempowered because after decades of this kind of struggle, the situation is worse than it has ever been. And the structures that led the first Intifada had been deliberately broken down. What do? The Intifada at that point had become more armed, and I didn't feel I could take part in armed struggle. And honestly, while I understand it, I also think that Israelis are stronger than us in that arena. So in terms of reactivating, I guess, the popular struggle, the idea was, can we globalize it? Can we bring people here? And I honestly would have these images of thousands of people. As you said, thousands of people have come, but in the beginning it wasn't. I thought thousands of people lining up and blocking Israeli tanks and bulldozers. And so we put out a call, and we didn't have really social media back then. It was calling or emailing some people that we knew. And, while I had dreams of thousands, we didn't get thousands, we didn't even get hundreds. We had 50 people who came, then we organized our first campaign. But those 50 people ended up going back to their countries with what they did and what they saw in Palestine and telling other people, who then called us and said, we want to come. And then more people came, and then those people went back to their countries. And now there have been thousands, maybe even tens of thousands. And all the time I'm meeting people saying, I was with the ISM, I was with the International Solidarity Movement, and that changed my life. Of course, it's not the International Solidarity Movement that changed their lives. It was Palestine, it was the Palestinian people. Seeing with your own eyes just what you can never learn through reading or documentaries or lectures or conferences. It's seeing it with your own eyes that just hits you. Like, how can this system exist in the 21st century? And just the generosity of the Palestinian people who have lived their entire lives stripped of basic human rights and yet still have the ability to love life and to welcome people, even coming from countries that enable Israel to continue this settler colonial apartheid system. And so to answer your question, like, how do I feel about it looking back? I think it was, we probably could have done a lot of things differently, of course, but what is amazing about it is that when people came, they gave of themselves, the experiences that they had, and we had a structure that kind of allowed us to learn from people and where they came from and the experiences that they had, and incorporate that. And so now when people or over the years, as people have gone back to their home countries, they've kind of mixed what they've learned in Palestine with their own experiences and managed to create projects and advocacy efforts that challenge the system and are working to change the policies in their own countries. So when we look at people carrying out direct actions in different countries, people who have been leaders in their efforts to boycott or divest, a lot of those people have come through in one way or another through the international solidarity movement and other groups, but it's really heartening to see just what the effect of Palestine has on people and people's activism, and that a few people with an idea about like, hey, come to Palestine, actually worked at that time. I don't mention this too much, but we were asking people to come to what looked like and really was a war zone. I mean, tanks, and you had tanks firing shells into neighborhoods and people dying, people being killed in the streets without ambulances being able to reach them.
Martyrs from ISM, Thomas Hundrell,
and Rachel Corrie and others injured, and our Palestinian organizers. And my parents, when I was going to demonstrations, my parents would call me from the US saying, Huwaida, don't go to those demonstrations, Huwaida, come home. And my answer was, I am home. I'm not leaving. But I was Palestinian, and I felt that attachment. Like, would someone who's not attached, sitting in comfort in Australia or the United States or Italy, would they come? And they did. They did. So that just is also testament to the power of people who really want to create something better, a better world, and so many people willing to sacrifice their own comforts for that. And that's what we continue to kind of believe in and build on, to challenge the system that leadership has, so-called leaders create.
So you took that experience and the network globally that came out of ISM and built on it the Flotilla movement to break the siege on Gaza. And of course, that also led to some martyrs on the Mavi Marmara. And you are continuing on that effort of trying to break the blockade. It's now, I think the first one was in 2010 or 2008. Sorry, yes, time passes so much now. We're 2008, and so we're 16 years into that experiment. And you have been trying to organize a new flotilla. The latest was the Israelis putting all that pressure on Equatorial Guinea, was it? Guinea-Bissau, one of the Guineas. Guinea-Bissau that took down the flags from the ships. Where is that going? And how do you assess it in terms of effort, finance, capabilities to do the flotillas, to the outcome of the effort?
Sure. So, I mean, as you said, the effort to challenge the blockade by sea did begin with ISM activists. This is another example of just ideas and projects that come out of experiencing the occupation. It was one day an activist from Australia who said, let's sail a boat to Gaza, which I honestly thought was a ridiculous idea because we didn't have boats or didn't know anything about boats, didn't have money to get a boat. But people worked on it and raised the money. And in the summer of 2008, we had 2 old fishing boats that honestly I wasn't sure would even get us across the Mediterranean. And then we had about 44 people from 17 different countries come and be willing to get on these boats to go and challenge the Israeli Navy. Like a crazy idea, but an idea that was rooted into challenging the very policies, this direct action. We're not accepting these policies. Challenge wherever we are. We're in the streets in our own home countries, taking to the sea to just tell Israel, no, we're not going to let you do this without trying to get in your way. And in 2008, our 2 small dilapidated fishing boats became the first two boats to get into Gaza in over 40 years of Israeli occupation without the permission of Israel. And that was important, not only because we made it to Gaza, but we were able to take out of Gaza a small number of people who needed medical attention that Israel was denying, to be reunited with their family that Israel was denying. And we vowed that we would continue this effort going back and forth until we could effectively break the siege. And we did try to do that, and we were successful a few more times, but then Israel started attacking our ships, one after the other after the other. It damaged one, almost capsized it. Another one it commandeered, took everyone hostage. And then you remember 2010, because that was when we organized a big flotilla of 7 ships, hundreds of people from over 35 countries, and Israel launched a lethal attack. And yes, it killed 10 activists on board. And the effort continued, and an example of, again, the initiative of people. After 2012, for personal reasons, I stepped back, but people continued to organize. And so the effort to challenge Israel's blockade by sea hasn't stopped. It didn't stop after 2010 or 2011. It continued. But now with what's happening in Gaza, I got back involved, and we are trying to organize a bigger flotilla. We were in Istanbul a couple of months ago, ready to go. We had 3 ships. We had a cargo ship loaded with 5,500 tons of aid. We had 2 other passenger vessels and hundreds of civilians from about 40 countries, knowing those people know what happened to our flotilla in 2010, know that 10 people were killed and over 50 were injured and everyone else was taken hostage. They know what Israel is doing in Gaza now, the brutality. So Israel is even more unhinged in their violence. They don't care. They don't care. And yet we're still willing to get on those ships and go challenge the Israeli Navy, not because anyone wanted to be a martyr or to die, but because we refuse to give in to this notion that Israel's barbarity is going to scare us away. Like, we still have to challenge. We're not leaving the Palestinian people alone. Our countries, yes, have abandoned international law, have abandoned the Palestinian people, but we want the Palestinian people to know that the people of the world have not abandoned them. And we're not going to give in to this notion that might is right. That's not the world we're fighting for. It's not the world we want to live in. That's not the world I want to pass on to my kids. It was hard to leave my kids and to try to promise them, like, Mom will be back, not knowing really if I was going to be back. But I knew that I couldn't not do that, because then what kind of world would I be passing on to my kids? Today it's Palestine. What's going to be tomorrow if we allow this to happen without challenging? But as you said, the night before we were supposed to get on those ships, we learned that Guinea-Bissau pulled the flag due to Israeli pressure. And we were devastated, of course, because we need to go now. But we're not done. We're not done. So Israel shouldn't think that it stopped us in any way. We are working now diligently to reflag our ships, and we are confident that we will get a new flag. Unfortunately, it's taken a little bit of time, but we will get a new flag within the next few weeks. And then just to understand the complicity of states, even states who say they support Palestine. Back in 2008, 2009, 2010, it is known that Israel's blockade, its siege, is unlawful. But countries not only did nothing about it, but they cooperated with it. So our first boats in 2008 left from Cyprus. Then Israel got to Cyprus, offered them some financial deal. Now Cyprus won't let our boats leave from there anymore. Same thing happened to Greece. Now we're going to try to leave from Turkey. Now we'll see what Turkey does. These countries, they're not only not challenging, but they're actively complicit in a situation that all human rights organizations at the United Nations have said is unlawful. This blockade put the genocide aside, the siege, the blockade that has been in place for 17 years is unlawful, and all of these countries are complicit in that blockade. And instead of joining us in challenging that or doing anything productive about breaking the siege besides just lip service, they're actively trying to stop us, or we can't give in.
People that want to get involved, that want to help, how can they reach out to you and the flotilla work?
We would love people to get involved in so many different ways. People, of course, can be on the flotilla, but not everybody can or should be. We need so many more people with eyes on the flotilla, with contacting their media, sharing information, and sharing their information with decision makers to put pressure on Israel to also not attack the flotilla. So follow us on social media. They can find all our social media handles on our website, which is freedomflotilla.org. Our website will put up updates, and then there you'll find us on all the social media platforms to find out, hopefully, our progress in flagging our ships, when we might be leaving, if people want to apply to be on the ships, or just help us spread the word and put the pressure on Israel not to attack these ships and pressure their governments to stop their complicity with what Israel is doing and to join us in breaking this siege.
Huwaida Arraf, thank you very much for your time. We hope the best for you and for the flotilla, and see you hopefully in a free Palestine very soon.
Inshallah, inshallah, in Gaza.
Inshallah.